Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television, and by the Daniel K. Miller Endowment Fund for Television Excellence.
The Adair County Free Press marked a milestone in 2014. Located in Greenfield, Iowa, the Free Press has been edited and published by the same family of editors since 1889. Circulation remains steady in a small rural county that is home to nearly 8,000 people, and there's been no sellout to a conglomerate. For all of its 125 years, the paper has been owned solely by the Sidey family. Back issues of the Free Press weave a vibrant tapestry of life in a small town. More than a century of stories on school activities and local businesses, special events including weddings, 4-H contests, sports championships, parades, accidents, men and women going off to war, and of course the perils and perfection of weather in the Midwest. Good people, good earth, both granted dignity and meaning on the pages of a small-town publication.
If you see a strong, good community in Iowa, especially a small community, chances are it's got a good newspaper. And that's some real personal rewarding feelings there in helping build that in a town.
Brothers Ed and Hugh Sidey were the fourth generation of journalists in their family. Hugh, a nationally renowned correspondent for Time magazine, wrote often about his hometown of Greenfield. And when the Adair County Free Press published its centennial edition in 1989, he wrote an article for Time questioning if the paper would still be published in another 100 years. And he wondered if Greenfield would even be recognizable that far in the future.
Contentment is necessary for an enduring rural culture. What in today's world is enough? Can families set aside the blandishments of television and be satisfied again with the spectacle of nature and living close to it, with homemade entertainments and being with one another doing good work on good land? Ed Sidey thinks we can if there is just enough money to keep people apace of the world in education and health care, if the economic base is adequate to support quality churches, parks, and streets. The fundamental values still celebrated along Greenfield streets are as sound as ever. The Adair County Free Press will continue to tell that story as it begins its second century. The story will be in the birth notices and the deliberations of the school board, in the obituaries too. Diligent readers, like those in Greenfield, can keep tabs on who starts out on the prairies and who ends up there. Hugh Sidey.
His brother Ed assumed the helm as editor and publisher of the Free Press in 1955. As Hugh was rising to national prominence documenting the lives and times of presidents, Ed had become one of the most respected editors among Iowa's newspapers. Both brothers followed their chosen paths. One's literary destiny was fulfilled in small-town Iowa, while the other's lie thousands of miles away from home. Hugh died in 2005 and Ed in 2008, each with his own legacy, and together as members of a legendary newspaper family.
I think it's been an advocate for the community. It's been a recorder of history. That's evident when we go looking for histories. The first place you go to are the back issues of a newspaper. I know someone said it's the first draft of history, and I think that's very true in a small town. I think the way the family has always run the paper is kind of an unabashed promoter of the community, a mutual self-interest that's there.
A well-educated public, as Thomas Jefferson said, is essential to the success of a democracy. And that's really the role of the newspaper. The newspaper is telling contemporary history. You know, academic history talks about what's gone before. The newspaper keeps up with that on a week-to-week or a day-to-day basis and tells people what's happening today.
The Free Press began its 125th year of publication with Ed's widow, Linda Sidey, serving as editor and publisher. With a circulation of 2,000, the newspaper continues to be the voice of Adair County, Iowa.
I think it's been a very important role for agriculture, for churches, the schools. You know, they've always been pro everything. You know, and the Free Press has always been what I consider a leader in that type of thing. You know,
it gives human interest stories and reflects really what's happening at this time in the community, and is a way to look through a little lens in terms of rural Iowa as a microcosm, what's happening in the world today. It keeps us grounded and well-founded and connects us to our heritage.
It is a local newspaper. It is about local events, it's about local people, and anymore we're seeing the newspapers and the television and so on become taken over by national companies, in some cases multinational companies, and so they're filling a tremendous void because this is the local news.
Who had papers today?
The Free Press and the community it serves enjoy a symbiotic relationship. When one is successful, the other also prospers. And when one experiences hardship, the other also is likely to struggle.
It's just being part of the community, I think, is what a newspaper is. It's just one of the many puzzles that makes a community run. I think we just reflect what the community is. I think that's all a newspaper can do, is reflect what a community can do. If it's in trouble, the Free Press is in trouble, well, we reflect that. You know, if there's no ads, everybody knows the community's in trouble.
To have the commitment to write the stories each week, not just to take canned articles, but to really write about the community. It gives everybody a perspective about the place that you live, and facts when there need to be facts, and celebration when there needs to be celebration. It's just one more stamp that we're worth it.
I think the town needs some kind of basic information path, and maybe that's what the Free Press has always been, an information path from school board to extension service to utilities to city council. Whatever's going on, there'll probably be something in the Free Press about it, and people know that.
Siblings, there it is.
There it is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Community members look forward to reading their weekly paper. Some can't wait for it to be delivered, preferring instead to come into the office to buy a copy hot off the presses.
It was something that you look forward to every week, and I think I told you in one of our discussions that there would be 15, 20 people lining up before the Free Press was even sitting on the counter in the old days.
One of the things I remember most was that Thursday at noon was a really special day at the Nichols family, because that's when we got the Free Press. And the Free Press really was all the news in the community and who was doing what and so on. And in Adair County in the 40s and 50s, the best thing that could happen to an Adair County farmer is if his son had grand champion steer at the county fair. As a young lad, I wanted that grand champion steer. I didn't want the trophy. I didn't want the recognition. I wanted to be on the front page of the Adair County Free Press above the fold.
Ed and Hugh's great-grandfather, John Sidey, arrived in Greenfield from Canada in the late 1880s. By that time, his son E.J. was working for a newspaper in nearby Cruston, Iowa. He joined his father in Greenfield with the shared goal of starting their own newspaper. Avid members of the Democratic Party, John and E.J. dubbed their new publication the Adair County Democrat. To meet the wants and defend the principles of democracy, this paper is established. It will earnestly labor to merit the patronage and confidence of the people of Adair County by its unselfish devotion to their best and truest interests. Respectively, E.J. Sidey. With that brief statement of purpose, the Adair County Democrat was launched on October 10, 1889. And in 1907, the paper proclaimed its First Amendment rights and was renamed the Adair County Free Press.
Well, E.J. was really the founder of the paper here in Greenfield. He was very involved in local civic affairs. He served 2 terms in the Iowa legislature. He developed himself as a speaker who from the newspaper accounts, traveled the state and spoke at commencements and various meetings in other places. So he, I think, put the Free Press as a newspaper on the map, and not just locally, but statewide, built a reputation for it being a good newspaper.
As the Free Press ended its second decade, E.J.'s 2 sons, Kenneth, also known as K.H., and John, were learning the printing trade from their father. The elder son, K.H., gravitated to the news and advertising side of the newspaper, while John became an expert printer. After serving in World War I, K.H. Sidey returned to Greenfield. In the early 1920s, he enrolled at the University of Missouri at Columbia to pursue a degree in journalism. Soon after, he got a wire from his father telling him that because of the Depression, the family had taken his college savings to rescue the Free Press. K.H. would have to come home. He did. And he spent the rest of his life working at the newspaper. In the wake of World War I, the Free Press began to change. K.H. capitalized on writing and page layout skills he learned in college, and he also implemented a key technological innovation. With their first linotype machine, the Sideys abandoned the slow and tedious practice of hand-setting type 1 letter at a time.
It took a good period of time, at least a year to really begin to be able to set type out of a case, and what you put it in is called a stick. And you can set the length of the line you want, and that's how it became a linotype. And then, of course, back in the linotypes, they worked from that same press bowl, except they did that mechanically, and you work from a keyboard.
I think the linotype machine is one of the greatest mechanical achievements ever of how those things work. It's still fascinating to me. And the plinking and tinking of these brass letter molds as they drop down into a magazine, and just the whole rhythm of that.
Another technical development change arrived at the Free Press in the midst of its 5th decade. While news photographs had replaced the old sketches in many big daily newspapers prior to the 1930s, they were still rare in the smaller papers. K.H. took up photography and began the practice of carrying a camera everywhere he went. Soon photos began replacing sketches on the pages of the local paper. K.H. built his own engraving plant in the basement of his home. In fact, the Free Press was one of the first weekly newspapers in Iowa to have its own photo engraving plant. His sons, Ed and Hugh, spent their boyhood in a home with a darkroom, first in a sweltering closet under the roof, and then in the basement beside the furnace.
They used to take photos and send them to Chicago, wait for them, and it would take, I don't know, a week or two maybe to get them back. And he was not happy with that. And he was one of the first in small community newspapers to do so. So he loved photography, and Hugh and Ed were his victims, and the dog Spot. Spot was in everything.
For more than 80 years, photos in the Free Press have been an important part of its news coverage. Shortly after assuming the helm in 2008, Linda Sidey discovered thousands of negatives in the basement of the old Free Press. They were a collection of images from the 1920s through the 1950s. The images captured decades of everyday life in Greenfield and the surrounding rural areas, and most were taken by members of the Sidey family.
They were artistic. I'm an art teacher. I saw the balance, I saw the form, I saw the darks and the lights and the shadows, and I knew, because I had done enough photography, what it took to frame a picture, and they were beautiful, and they all told a story. It's sort of a community, of a small community, and it had to be. I had to do something with them. A lot of small newspapers threw those out when they sold. They would sell to a bigger paper, and then for room or purposes other than that, nobody has collections like this because they were thrown out. And that's so sad.
World War II dominated much of the sixth decade of the Free Press. The war in Europe, the draft, and Pearl Harbor all affected the paper and the news it covered. It struggled to keep up. Men and women leaving for service, news from those serving, scrap metal drives, and support from home, and so on. Hugh talked about his father's dedication to covering the war.
When one turns the old pages, the start of World War II is clearly marked. Every contingent of draftees was lined up in front of the bus that would take them to camp. Their pictures were snapped, their names and the names of their parents faithfully recorded. In the fading volumes, those placid, strong young faces form a continuing gallery. Hugh Sidey.
Ed and Hugh were Free Press staff members after school and on Saturdays, until the war called both of them into service after graduation from Greenfield High School. When they were reunited at Iowa State College after the war, both decided to pursue careers in engineering. But they only lasted a year before the Sidey brothers were drawn across campus to the journalism department and the Iowa State Daily, where they found jobs and purpose. Soon after, they began working at the Omaha World Herald. In 1958, Hugh was hired by Time magazine in Washington, D.C., where he dove headfirst into the capital's political scene. Known for his column, The Presidency, Hugh was regarded in Washington and throughout the nation as one of the most prominent and well-versed of journalism insiders.
He was a journalist to be admired. He brought to it a dimension that so many others didn't get. They could write the who, where, when, what, why thing, fine. Hugh got another dimension into his stories, and they read much more as if you knew about these people. Now, they're not soft. He was handling the top stories all the time, but he brought that dimension that I used to think he brought with him from Iowa.
The late 1950s was a time of transitions for the Sidey family and for the Free Press. The newspaper was in its 7th decade. K.H. had been covering Adair County for 35 years, but health issues prompted him to ease up a bit. He longed to devote more time to his weekly tramps out the railroad right-of-way to the west and into the timber south of Lake Nottoway, to a nature area that now bears his name. He asked his sons if one of them would be interested in taking over the paper. If not, there were buyers. In a 1984 Iowa Public Television program called Touchstone, Hugh and Ed were interviewed together about their family's history in the newspaper business. And when asked how it was decided who would take over the Free Press when their father retired, the brothers described an emotional transition.
I think the two of us kind of discussed it, and Ed was the older and I was the younger, and I think I said, let's do what you want. What would you like to do? One of those things that we felt probably more than decided. Ed, is that the way
I think so. You mentioned that I was the oldest and had first choice, and if I didn't take it, you would, but I took it. I mean, I said, I'll go home. I had always thought that I would, I think, eventually anyway.
He wanted his father to have a legacy, and he was proud of what his father did, and he wanted to do as well as his father.
With Ed at the helm, the Free Press rode the ups and downs of the post-war world. For a while, it looked as if Greenfield would grow dramatically. New houses went up by the score. Cattle and hog prices climbed. Grain prices soared as a hungry world sought aid. New machines rumbled through the thick fields.
What I remember especially about growing up was everything revolved around Wednesday. I mean, Wednesday was the start and end of every week, and that was just the whole rhythm of life with the newspaper coming out on Wednesday. It was really a family business. You know, our family life revolved around those press days. We took vacations based on press days and the news cycle. And so, oftentimes that meant we wouldn't leave for vacation until a Thursday so that Dad could be back for press day.
There were usually a couple of pens and a notepad in Ed's shirt pocket when he covered his beats. His office, adorned with maps, clipboards, and a camera, looked a little cramped for a man who stood 6'2", and he stuck with his trusty typewriter, even when technology tried to sway him otherwise.
Well, one day I was working at the Iowa Newspaper Association, and the receptionist said, "There's a call for you from Hugh Sidey." And he said, "Do you know of any vendors that have expertise in computer systems for newspapers like the Greenfield newspaper?" And I gave him the name of a couple of our affiliate members who did that kind of work. And he says, "Well, I think Ed could use a little help over there." So the vendor was contacted by Hugh, and Hugh bought the system for Ed. And so the vendor came in very early in the morning, unpacked all the boxes and crates, and got all the computers hooked up, the printers and the whole system hooked up. And Ed walks in the door and sees all this, and he says, I really think you're wasting your time. You know, you've done so much here, and I told you I'm not going to buy. And the vendor says, "Well, there's one more thing I want you to look at." And he gave him the bill of sale. It was marked paid, and it had been paid by Hugh. And the funny thing about that is, though Ed still kept using his typewriter that Linda found at a church garage sale, he called it a war on computers. He just had this thing about technology. But Hugh had this love for that newspaper. He was going to make sure that Ed and the staff, at least, had the tools that they needed to succeed.
As the fourth generation of his family to serve as publisher and editor of the Free Press, Ed Sidey proudly worked on the local newspaper. His brother Hugh was the big city sophisticate, traveling the world hobnobbing with presidents and writing magnificent opinion pieces about some of the most important issues of the 20th century.
Hugh Sidey kept Time magazine in touch with real people, and you could sense that in his columns. He wrote the column called The Presidency almost every week for 50 years. And those columns gave the best insights I ever read anywhere about what the presidents were like and what kind of pressure was on them, how serious this job could be, even frightful, and how sad and lonely it could sometimes be. And he would capture that.
When he met the presidents, you know, they weren't as tall as he wanted them to be. They weren't as handsome. They weren't as, you know, bold and defiant and chisel-chinned, and, you know, they weren't superheroes. They were regular people in extraordinary circumstances. What interested my dad the most about them, from what I can tell, was their basic humanity. It was like, what are the important things that are facing these people, and how would we see ourselves doing this? And that, to me, is the essence of what he did.
Ed was the small-town scribe, sharing news of the local community and penning weekly columns and editorials championing the virtues of the simple life and the values of community involvement.
He saw it as an important role in the community, essential to the community. So he was involved personally in a lot of things, but in documenting what happened. But it was more than just that. You know, it was really contributing to the community, being a part of it. You know, he served on the school board. He served on a number of committees through his tenure as a newspaper editor. And by some standards, by some journalistic standards, that crosses a line. He shouldn't be doing that. But I think because of his personal integrity, people trusted him to still put out an honest, fair report of a story, even if he was sitting on that committee. He would set his notebook aside and render his opinion as a citizen, a knowledgeable opinion, and then pick up his notebook and take notes for the story. It's just, in a way, it's kind of unimaginable of what a community would be like without a newspaper, or vice versa. You know, he just really felt like it was a trust. It was the community's newspaper, and he was the caretaker of it.
You know, there's this common perception out there of what a newspaper reporter or editor or publisher is like, and they're different depending on the size of their markets. And in the community market, like he was in, I would say he was a model. He knew that in order to be successful, he had to know as much about his town as anyone in town.
During the farm crisis of the 1980s, Ed Sidey spoke to his readers about the gravity of the situation.
These are difficult times, and the survival of small towns is at stake. With these small towns hang the fate of our schools, our churches, our civic and social organizations, and the whole way of life that we have enjoyed so long in Iowa. It's not just the family farm that is threatened these days. Main Street hangs in the balance too. There are those who would argue that there are too many towns anyway, and the elimination of some is just a fact of life. We don't buy that for a minute. True, in the Old West, when the mine played out and gold or silver was gone, some towns became ghost towns. But even then, others held on to a precarious existence. They refused to die. Now we visit them for their scenery, their pure air or water, their quality of life. This is the make or break season for small towns. It is the time of year when the difference between profit or loss can be wrapped up in 1 month. If every resident of every small town would make a conscious choice to shop their hometown first, it is likely that those hometowns will be around next year. Use it or lose it. It's as simple as that. Ed Sidey.
He was a master journalist, a master writer. He had a real flair for the English language, as did his brother Hugh. And I always admired his stories in the papers. He won best editorial page for the weekly press in Iowa for years at at press convention. I think editorials and columns are some, if you do it right, it's the soul of the community. You write about something, an issue that people are interested in. Generally, the columns or the editorials that are written on local issues, or at least, if not strictly local, on state issues that people can relate to. Those are the things that make people want to come back, keep coming back to the paper and reading it.
If the community was kind of in doubt whether they should do something, he would say it like it was, in his opinion, and say, hey, this is what we need to do. And so we rallied around and got it done then. So he was always an excellent community starter and getting things done. He was a pillar of the community, he sure was.
I think it evoked people to read and to learn from what he presented. And in very subtle ways, I think he was changing opinions. And so in that way, his writing was very digestible, pleasing for a person to read, and I think it created thought-provoking kinds of considerations.
Ed knew his prose wouldn't reach the millions who read his brother's words in time, but that was okay. His dream was to educate his rural county. He once wrote,
Personal involvement in a community is more satisfying than being a speck in a metropolis. The strength of the small town is that it attracts and holds people who realize this fact. The real satisfactions are here. Take it from an old country editor who once wrote news for a big city daily and never once in more than 3 years had a reader call and say thanks for a story, or for that matter, call to disagree with me. At the Free Press, the opposite is true. Our readers are the real editors, and we wouldn't have it any other way. Ed Sidey.
One of the advantages, I think, in my position is that you do have a good feedback from readers, and your impact is measured rather quickly. The next day they tell you whether you were on target or off base on your editorial. And also, in a community of that size, you can see things change. It doesn't happen very fast in Greenfield, or I suspect maybe it doesn't happen very fast in Washington either. But
That's right.
But you do see things happen, and the bond issue you support gets passed, and the school gets built, or whatever happens. You see, and you've had an input in that. And
while Hugh reached what most would consider the pinnacle of a writer's career as Washington bureau chief for Time magazine, he never forgot about home. In a 1977 letter to his parents, one of many, he wrote,
It is a bit of a wonder why I still feel as I do after doing so much and going so far around this world. The answer is you and Dad, our home, that little town, and this nation. I have been so lucky. In material possession, we had enough, but not too much. Our world was essentially things that were meaningful: goodness, honesty, music, friendship, hard work, the outdoors, the land. Happiness lies therein. My roots are still there. Every time I see those rolling miles, I know I am home. A great land with great people. Hugh Sidey.
My dad's first question was usually, where are you from? And probably because that meant so much to him. Where he was from made such an enormous difference. And I'm sure, honestly, I'm sure he idealized it and romanticized it a bit, as anybody does. I think there was probably a time there, just knowing him and knowing what I've gone through, where your ambition kind of, you forget about where you came from for a while and you're focused on where you're going. But when he got to a place where he was comfortable with where he was, he would often think about where he came from. And that informed him and was his touchstone forever.
He never left Greenfield in the dust, as many very successful people, maybe particularly in the very competitive world of the press, very competitive. But he always could see the small story that went maybe into the big story. So he had a feel for people. He had a love for printer's ink. And that's a pretty good combination.
When you go from that to Washington, D.C. area, I'm sure the contrast was very vivid, and the memories were pretty strong, obviously, with you. But he really had an affection for Iowa, for Iowans, for Greenfield, for community newspapers, and as many of us do. And he was able to articulate it so well that it came across to everybody.
He knew the quality of people here, and that they have good judgment and good values, and people who have that kind of grounding and rootedness usually have pretty good perspective on huge issues even that are bothersome to the world or the nation. And I think that's what he recognized, and that's what he would tap into when he got back here. Of course, he was doing that all the time, all over the world too, but he gave voice to those Iowa feelings that he would find right here on the square in Greenfield. It was, he interpreted Iowa very favorably to the rest of the world.
Hugh wrote a lot about Greenfield and about Adair County for both the Free Press and Time magazine. He often reflected on his childhood and how the community remained after he left. Much of what he wrote about was present in the photographs his grandfather, his father, and his brother took of the area. He wrote of home and family, of neighbors and friends, of schools and the churches, and the strength that came from the land and its farmers. He especially talked about the farmers.
I saw the hard work of farming through my boyhood friends. In the fall, before there were combines, the raw skin of their hands showed that they had been husking corn. And in the spring, they would sometimes skip school to help with the planting. I would often see them in the farm fields riding tractors as they chiseled the gray winter earth into fresh black folds. I knew that soon, green growth would follow, and smiles would be back on the faces of my young friends. Hugh Sidey.
I think his roots. I think where he came from, and I think growing up, being part of that, the Adair County Free Press is really what kept him grounded as a person. The values he grew up with, I think the hardships that he grew up with in terms of, I don't think he was a Depression baby, but I think he...
Well, he grew up in the Depression.
He grew up
in
a time,
talk about it.
Yeah, when people really didn't have much, and I think even the farm crisis to some degree, I just think he had a real empathy and a real compassion for people's struggles, and it's reflected, I think, in his writings too, but in a nice way. He wasn't a, feel sorry for me kind of person. He was more of a, let's learn from these lessons and let's make good things out of bad things. But I absolutely think he was always the prairie boy. Always, I was always in his blood, and I think that's really what shaped who he is and kept him grounded.
Despite decades of differing careers and lifestyles, the Sidey brothers remained exceptionally close, sharing intellectual and emotional approaches to the two worlds in which they lived.
I honestly couldn't believe how close they were for siblings. And I asked Ed once, I said, why? I've never seen anything like this. I mean, you just love each other. You lived together and you grew up together, you went to college in the same dorm, you worked together, and you're still together. Sometimes something happens, and it never happened. And I said, why is that? And he says, well, we respect each other. He respects what I do and thinks I do a good job, and I think that's part of being a gentleman, but being good brothers too.
He would always call his brother, probably once a week, to ask the same questions. What are you writing about? What's going on in the hometown? What is, what's the pulse there? He came back a lot. He, one thing that I can tell you about my dad that's different from a lot of folks. I know a lot of folks that are from a certain place that won't go back for whatever reason, memories, or they've moved on, or it's not cool, or whatever. It's just like, yeah, my family's from here and it's a spot on a map. My dad would go back to Greenfield with, on any pretense. It just became sort of this touchstone for Middle America. His brother was his hotline to, I think, what he considered reality.
That's where he got his education. I mean, newspaper education, and a lot of the stories that he would tell were, I started sweeping the floors in the Free Press. I wasn't a reporter right away. This is how I started, and I think that's what really meant so much to him.
So really being in the mix of what was going on with his family, his father, his uncle, his grandfather, to be part of that and to have that as your foundation and your basis for how you shaped your life, it's really priceless to think something so simple could be so meaningful.
Hugh found his way back to Greenfield often and never lost his appreciation for Midwestern culture and the people of his hometown. He always credited Ed for helping him maintain perspective about what really mattered in life, even as he traveled the world in the company of presidents. Hugh wrote his lifelong friend Dave Nichols this letter in 2005, shortly before his death.
I've had a pretty good run of it back here in Washington, but I have never been able to recapture that small town environment for my family that I had experienced in Greenfield. Even in their brief visits to Adair County, my kids and now my grands sense it. The openness of the sky and land, the concern and warmth of the people, the work of doing things that really matter. I never really left home. As you know, I kept coming back, and there was this bond that at times kept me sane. The families who stayed and worked and helped each other and laughed and accepted almost everything which came along are still the foundation of our civilization. Wes Jackson down at the Land Institute put it well. The farms, ranches, and small towns of this country are the last factors of decency. Perhaps that is a bit overstated, but there is truth in it.
For years, the Free Press was printed on site, but each decade brought new technology that promised to forever change small-town papers. Eventually, it was decided it was just too costly to keep the printer. Today, the Free Press is printed by the Cruston News Advertiser, about 20 miles to the south. For Ed Sidey, it wasn't easy saying goodbye to the printing press.
I remember Dad watching that operation when the workmen came in to unbolt the press from its foundation and take it out the back door and load it onto a big semi-truck. And Dad looked kind of wistful, I think, as he watched it leave, because it really represented the end of an era, really the end of an era that had lasted since the beginning of the paper.
We have a picture of Ed standing out there looking very sad, watching them load it. And I wasn't around, so it was sad. And because I'm sure Hugh helped buy the Goss. It was a 3-unit. And once you quit printing your paper, you lose your independence. You're on their schedule.
In the late 1990s, Hugh wrote about the old press moving on in Time magazine and for the Free Press. He entitled the article, "Published and Perished."
After 108 years, its glorious Wednesday night baritone was not to be heard. No more would it summon folks to come and read how kids' crepe paper birthdays rivaled royal cotillions, or how the class dullard shone like a bright star. True, the newspaper lives on, and I hope it will be rich with the fragments of life of Greenfield. But the renowned iron patriarch that stamped these small stories into history has been whisked away to oblivion. In the office, there are only low voices and the tick of computers heralding the new century. The clove-like smell of printer's ink has already been subdued by cleaning solvents and fresh paint. The absence is marked, though, by a great gaping hole in the back shop, as if a huge molar had been yanked. The arguments are of cost-effectiveness and the inexorable consolidation that comes with our culture. Still, there is melancholy when a friend moves on. Hugh Sidey.
Like the printing presses, newspapers have said goodbye over the years as well. Iowa peaked at 434 newspapers in 1961. Today, only 300 remain in Iowa. But that's more newspapers per capita than any other state in the nation. Roughly 35 are daily newspapers, with the remainder weekly or twice weekly. About half of Iowa's papers are locally owned, and only 16 are multi-generational, including, of course, the Adair County Free Press.
Well, I think they're relevant. You don't have traffic jams outside your newspaper on publication day and not be relevant. When you've got 90% plus penetration with the print product, and you've got people from all over the country taking it because they used to live here, the larger newspapers would kill to have 90% penetration. And so they're very relevant. I think the challenges they have are more on the economic side. You go back to the publisher hat that Ed wore. You know, where is the advertising going, and how's Main Street doing, and how's our community doing in terms of retail and in terms of industrial growth and economic development. And of course the newspaper is going to be right in the middle of all that, trying to make it happen because they have fixed franchises. But you know, as urban centers draw more and more people away from smaller towns, that becomes a challenge, certainly.
If you're doing your job, they'll look to you as the source of information about the community. And that's really the role that you play, is to try to keep people informed and educated on what's important in the community.
The Sidey brothers both enjoyed long and distinguished careers in journalism, yet it seemed their typewriters were silenced far too soon. In 2005, Hugh died of a sudden heart attack in Paris at the age of 78, and his passing was mourned throughout the highest levels of journalism and government.
I think Hugh is one of a kind. To be such a good journalist. I mean, he knew where the stories were. He got the right sources. He was such a likable man himself that the sources were happy to talk to him first. He didn't, barge in on them and talk tough. I think we lost a feeling for small towns. His heart belonged, he said this to me, his heart belonged to small towns. Of course, I remember saying, well, you're flying pretty high. But he understood the people. He also felt that being a journalist, you wanted not just to do what was in the headline, you wanted to get the feel of the place, and nobody was better than Hugh about that. The man had genuine talent, remarkable talent, I think, in lacing the human being into these world important stories, which not many people at all had it, but he had it in spades, yeah.
So there was the contrast of the, what do you want to call it, the planes that they operated on, But both of them approached their journalistic missions with serious dedication and great imagination and great affection for who they were covering. And I thought that always came through in the stuff they wrote. They were both just solid reporters. So they were a real, I mean, you'd have a hard time finding two siblings that came up at any time in Iowa communications who've done that well, because they both really did.
The legacy of the newspaper is almost impossible, at least when I look at it, it's almost impossible to separate from the history of the town, which, I don't know that you can say that one family is responsible for, obviously not for the history of the town, but we were, and still are, the historians of that tiny little piece of America, and that I know to my dad was always a source of a great deal of joy.
From the romantic side of him, I think he did have I don't want to say a regret, but I think he did lament about what would it have been like if I'd stayed.
Right.
Because I think everybody
Sure.
kind of has, the what if thing for certain things in their life. But I do think, and that's one of the reasons why I think he kept in close touch. Mm-hmm. Because he could. He grew up very close to his parents and his brother. And I think he helped out a great deal. But I think he did miss a lot of, the simple, like you said earlier, the honest way of life and the simple way of life.
Yeah. And especially towards the end of his life, I think.
Yeah.
He really started to think more and more about Greenfield.
I got a phone call from my staff, and they said, "You've got to come back." And I did, and Ed was in his office and just turned around from everybody. And I just looked, I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Hugh died." And I went, "Oh no," and I guess Ed just, his comment that staff told me was, "No, not Hugh. It shouldn't be Hugh." He was thinking it should be him. And so I didn't know what to do. I mean, I knew there was no comforting him. There would be none. So I left him in the office and went in there and just kind of sat and rubbed his back, and then we went home and we just sat there in silence. What do you do?
In addition to being heartbroken at the loss of his beloved brother, Ed endured a lengthy and painful illness until his death in 2008 at 82. When he died, the entire Adair County community grieved, and his loss was felt by those in the newspaper business throughout the state of Iowa.
I miss him a lot. He was a good friend and a wonderful journalist. And it's hard, you can't replace him in Iowa. It's in many cases, it's like the bucket, you put the hand in, you take it out, and you don't notice. But in case of Ed's bucket, you notice. He was a great institution in our trade in Iowa.
When Dad was in his last days out in the hospital, he asked us to bring his typewriter out to him because he was convinced he needed to write one more column. He wanted to have that typewriter there just in case he was feeling well enough so that he could have something to do, have something to type. And that was his connection to everything. And I think that just exemplified that was his life. That was what he enjoyed. That's what he wanted to contribute to other people, literally up till the end. But that's what he wanted to do. That was his legacy.
Well, the obvious void was on the editorial page. And he never missed a week with editorial. So that was a void. His weekly column, and that was a lot of times humorous, and, you know, having a weekly column and putting your life out there for everybody to read, you know, people enjoyed that. So there were voids, but, you know, his wife Linda, you know, just kept going. And so Ed taught her well too, and we still have a paper.
Ed's widow, Linda, assumed the role of editor and publisher of the Adair County Free Press and remains so today.
I thought maybe I could do it. It was a struggle. I had people helping me that wanted me to continue. I thought I could, and I did. And it's all about the staff. It's all about the community.
It's also about legacy. Since 1889, the Sidey family has edited and published the Free Press. In those 125 years, the Sideys have written fondly about their small rural community and the people who live there. Ed and Hugh's distant worlds were forever connected by the allure of their hometown in Iowa.
Both Ed and I stayed very close to Greenfield, Iowa. There's something about growing up on a newspaper that you know the community, and I think we had an especially good boyhood, albeit it was during the Depression, but in some ways that brought you together, and it was a marvelous growing up period. We had no money. I mean, everybody was poor by the terms we know today, but we had this great wealth of love and open space and good health and people that cared about you, you know. That's a legacy that you just can't leave. And I don't think either one of us ever really drifted very far away.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television, and by the Daniel K. Miller Endowment Fund for Television Excellence.